uncover valuable opportunities in one of the world's most rapidly rising regions. Request your invite for this exclusive event at QatarEconomicForum.com.
At MassMutual, our commitment to wealth management means offering financial advisors the best of both worlds. With our innovative supported independence model, we're giving you freedom with resources you need to run your business, helping you make a name for yourself with our good name behind you, freeing you to offer clients the advice they need, and making sure you're properly compensated for that advice. When it comes to wealth management, we choose to lead. Learn more at massmutual.com/wealth.
Landmark infrastructure legislation was passed in the last Congress. Now comes the work of getting it built. The Global X U.S. Infrastructure Development ETF, ticker PAVE, invests in dozens of companies helping shape the future of American infrastructure. Investing involves risk, including possible loss of principal. Investments in infrastructure-related companies have greater exposure to the potential adverse economic, regulatory, political, and other changes affecting such entities. Before investing, carefully consider the fund's objectives, risks, charges, expenses, and more in the full or summary prospectus at globalxetfs.com. Read carefully. Distributed by SEI Investments Distribution Company.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Stocks end the day mixed following comments from Fed Chair Jay Powell. He is reiterating the Federal Reserve's wait-and-see approach before starting the much-anticipated interest rate cuts. He says recent inflation figures have not altered their direction. The Dow was down 43 or 0.1%. The S&P was up 6 or 0.1%. The Nasdaq added 37 or 0.25%. The battle for control of Disney is over. Walt Disney Company shareholders have elected all of Disney's choices for the board of directors and none of the candidates promoted by dissident investors who wanted to see more cost cuts and other changes at Disney. Streaming companies raising prices in the past year include Disney Plus, Netflix, ESPN Plus, and twice in 1 year, Apple Plus. Joining that list is Spotify. Bloomberg News reports Spotify listers in 5 countries will see their prices go up by $1 or $2 a month by the end of this month, and a U.S. price hike is coming later this year. I'm Nancy Lyons, Bloomberg Radio.
This is Bloomberg Law with June Brotto from Bloomberg Radio.
Florida Supreme Court issued 2 rulings on abortion on Monday. One will allow the state's 6-week abortion ban to go into effect, while the other will let voters decide on a proposed ballot measure in November that will protect access to abortion up until viability. In every state where abortion rights have appeared on the ballot, the side of abortion rights has won, including in conservative states like Kentucky, Ohio, and Kansas. I've been talking to healthcare attorney Harry Nelson of Nelson Hardiman. The ballot measure is pretty broad, isn't it?
Yeah, the ballot measure basically has the concept of fetal viability built in, which I believe is understood to extend to over 20 weeks. So essentially allowing women in the first 2 trimesters, more or less, to have the option of abortion. So it is a fairly broad and liberal ruling. It would essentially give definitely a period of at least 8 plus maybe 9 weeks longer than the 15-week option, which is something that the pro-choice advocates have been wanting, just to give women more time to make choices. So, yeah, it's a fairly liberal, permissive constitutional amendment that will be before Florida voters on the November ballot, and it will be interesting to see how that plays out alongside the presidential election and all the other really very important decisions that Florida voters have to make this year.
Well, Republican lawmakers are arguing that it will allow abortions late in pregnancy.
It's absolutely true. I mean, look, when going back to the medication abortion option for a minute, the FDA approval for mifepristone, which we were talking about only a couple of weeks ago when Supreme Court heard argument, only is allowed to use up to 11 weeks. So this is certainly a much broader issue, and it'll be interesting to see how voters react. I think that it does seem that in the vast majority of places, a majority of voters support more permissive abortion rights, but the question of whether the language here is broader than will attract the majority will be interesting to see.
Well, the 3 female DeSantis appointees on the court dissented on the ballot measure due to concerns that the impact of the amendment was far greater than what voters will be led to believe at the ballot box. They really don't give much credence to voters. They act like voters don't understand what's right in front of them.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Look, I think we've seen that voters in states like Kansas have really given a rebuke to extremely conservative positions taken by their legislators, by Supreme Court jurists in those states. Personally, I have more faith in the voters to make themselves heard, and we've seen that when these issues go to the ballot box, there's far more support. It's harder for either side, frankly, to engage in legislative gamesmanship or to sort of take advantage of head counting on particular courts to get their way. And so from my perspective, I think it's a good thing that we're going to the voters, but obviously not everybody feels that way.
And they have to get 60% for it to pass. And so now, abortion rights groups in several states are trying to put measures on the ballot. And anti-abortion groups have deployed a wide range of tactics to keep proposals off the ballot, including challenging the language.
Yeah, it's very interesting the way that popular referenda, that voter initiatives have become a threat to the pro-life movement and to advocacy for more restrictive abortion laws. And it just shows the extent to which the idea of restricting women's choices and women's rights to reproductive health care access is just fundamentally unpopular and not something that the majority of Americans want, and yet something that has succeeded by virtue of, this whole legal effort in the courts and legislatures. And so it's ironic in a way that the most democratic process we have, which is to let voters decide at the ballot box, is now the threat to the same people. And it definitely should give pause to anybody who really thinks that the issue here has political support. That in Republican politics nationally, we've now seen several cycles in which excessive restriction of abortion has been politically unpopular and costly in numerous elections. And so it's surprising that we continue to see this resistance to acknowledging and honoring the will of the voters to have some level of abortion protection and access to reproductive health care choices available. And it seems like its decision to try to restrict this beyond what voters want is having a political cost that we're continuing to see play out for Republicans.
Speaking about the cost of going too far, in the case that got national attention, where a woman in Texas was charged with murder, arrested and spent 3 days in jail in 2022, after health officials reported her to authorities for attempting to terminate her pregnancy. She's now suing the Stark County District Attorney's Office for more than $1 million, claiming the fallout from the case has changed her life forever.
Lizelle Gonzalez, she's suing the prosecutors now, saying that they knowingly misrepresented the facts in order to arrest her and charge her, and that they caused significant harm to her. That's quite a fascinating case about sort of how local prosecutors may have gone much too far in the way that they really made a spectacle of later spent time in jail, publishing her mugs out of the paper and putting her private medical information into the newspapers. And so, just another chapter in this bizarre case where she is now going after them and essentially alleging that they violated her rights in the way that they went after her criminal liability for her decision to take medication abortion. So it's just yet another example of this crazy back and forth chaotic situation where literally a private healthcare choice that this woman made led to such a extreme reaction.
And the district attorney was investigated by the State Bar of Texas over his handling of the case, and they reached a settlement so that his office could continue prosecuting cases. The settlement conditions included a $1,250 fine and a year-long probation of his legal license. He told the Associated Press, "I made a mistake in that case. We'll see if that translates into money damages," for Gonzalez. Thanks so much, Harry, as always. That's Harry Nelson of Nelson Hardiman. Let's turn now to some surprising admissions today in Fifth Circuit oral argument over the Texas law known as SB 4 that authorizes state officials to arrest, detain, and deport non-citizens who enter the country illegally. Joining me is Bloomberg Texas legal reporter Madeline Mecklenburg. Was the state of Texas on the defensive in these arguments?
They definitely were. They knew coming into the arguments today that they were facing an uphill battle. This same three-judge panel of the Fifth Circuit just last week has ruled to block this law while they consider the full appeal. So I think what we saw from Texas today was a more nuanced position on what they'd be willing to accept from the court. At one point, remarkably, we heard the Texas Solicitor General suggest that perhaps Texas had gone too far in trying to pass this statute. Right, and that they'd be willing to, if the court decided that they wanted to block the law from going into effect, they asked that they still let some provisions of the measure go into effect, specifically one that would let the state order the removal of people who they've identified as being here illegally.
What part of the law did they think went too far?
Well, the way that he framed that idea was that Texas crafted this statute as a whole with the intention of going right up to the line of what Supreme Court precedent has allowed up to this point, which, as I'm sure you and your listeners know, is basically 150 years of the federal government being the one responsible for immigration enforcement and the border. And so Texas was trying to take as much authority as possible with this statute while not running afoul of that precedent, because they knew that this law would get challenged in the courts and that they'd end up here right now. But it seems that Texas was willing to allow the court to temporarily put on hold. But that's important to note too. Like, the conversation that's happening right now is all over a preliminary injunction. This is not the last word on the matter. But they seemed okay for now for most of the statute to be blocked by the court if they could keep on the books that provision that would let them remove people.
How did the judges on the Fifth Circuit, on the panel, react to that?
It was a little bit like deja vu, since it was the same three judges that had heard this case a few weeks ago. We had Judge Andrew Bolden, who was the one that was clearly in support of this law and thought it should go into effect. He had a lot of questions and concerns for the DOJ attorney that was there, asking about whether the court has the authority to block this law in totality before it's been allowed to go into effect. But the other judges were a little more quiet. Judge Irma Ramirez hardly spoke at all during the hearing, but we know that she previously wanted to block the law. And I think the swing vote here that everyone's paying attention to is Chief Judge Priscilla Richmond. She has been on the fence in the past. She did rule in favor of blocking the law previously in this case. She raised some of the same concerns today that she did in that opinion, which is basically this idea that precedent up to this point has been that immigration is the responsibility of the federal government.
And just explain what happened last week when this same three-judge panel made a decision.
So this case has been bouncing back and forth between the courts, and in doing so, the courts have let the law go into effect, blocked the law, let it go into effect. Last week, this same three-judge panel of the Fifth Circuit, they basically said that they were going to allow a district court order blocking the law to remain in effect while they weighed the full appeal of that order. So what we heard today were arguments on the merits of the case, the appeal of the district judge ruling. Previously, all they were doing was deciding whether or not the law should go into effect while they weighed this case.
And this case already went to the Supreme Court. Tell us what happened there.
When the case got to them, they said it was too early for them to get involved because the Fifth Circuit had not issued a stay pending appeal. They issued an administrative stay, staying the decision while they decided on a stay pending appeal, while they decided the appeal.
Congratulations on keeping all that straight. I see that the chief judge, who most people do say is the swing vote here, toward the end of the argument, emphasized that states aren't permitted to remove non-citizens, and the Supreme Court decided that, striking down the immigration law in Arizona in 2012. Quote, it's on the books. So did she appear to be leaning against this law?
I would say so, and that language is coming basically directly from the order they issued last week on this. And the Arizona decision is key here, and it's what the U.S. government has been turning to frequently in arguing against letting this law go into effect. But I think that her point also raises a bigger question here that I think a lot of people have, which is, how is Texas actually going to enforce this law? This is something they talked about today, and that really is specifically because people who come to the country have certain types of asylum. There's processes in place from the federal government, and it's not clear at this point how this Texas law might impact federal immigration enforcement activities that are ongoing. And that's something that I think Judge Richmond appeared concerned about today, too.
It appears that the writing is on the wall, but we'll see. Thanks, Madeline. That's Madeline Mecklenburg, Bloomberg Texas legal reporter. Coming up next, why Google is deleting billions of data records. This is Bloomberg.
From Bloomberg World's headquarters in New York, I'm Doug Prisner. Let's take a moment to get you up to speed on the hour's top stories. We'll begin with Fed Chair Jay Powell. Today, he suggested the Fed will wait for clearer signs of lower inflation before cutting interest rates. Powell said the recent inflation figures, though higher than expected, really have not materially changed the overall outlook. He reiterated his expectation that it will likely be appropriate to begin cutting rates some point this year. Treasury Secretary Yellen is looking for ways to protect American industries from Chinese business practices, and she is keeping her options open. Yellen spoke with reporters today while en route to China. She was asked whether she's planning to brief Beijing on likely fresh trade barriers as a way of addressing Chinese overcapacity in clean energy sectors. She said she would not want to rule out other possible ways to protect those industries. Apple is investigating a push into personal robotics. We are told engineers at Apple have been exploring a mobile robot that can follow users around their homes. The effort is still in the beginning stages, and it's unclear if the products will ultimately be released. Shareholders in Disney handed CEO Bob Iger a big vote of confidence today. They rejected a move by activist investor Nelson Peltz to get a board seat on the Disney's board. Shareholders also elected all of Disney's choices for those board seats. Sherry Redstone has a tentative agreement to sell her stake in Paramount Global, and we were told the buyer would be Skydance Media, the company run by David Ellison. Skydance wants to buy Redstone's family holding company, National Amusements. National, by the way, owns 77% of all the voting shares in Paramount. Alphabet is reportedly exploring charging for web features powered by generative AI. The FT saying the options include adding some AI-powered search features in Google to Alphabet's premium subscription service. Next, Ed Baxter is in the... Thank you very much. New York judge denied Donald Trump's request to delay his upcoming hush money trial until after the U.S. Supreme Court rules on immunity. It looks as if this trial will begin April 15th. The death toll from Taiwan's largest quake in 25 years stands at 9. Officials say at least 963 injured. And Bloomberg's Adrian Kennedy says crews are still out working through the rubble.
It struck in the east of Taiwan, in Hualien, which is relatively underpopulated compared to the western part of the island. This is an island of 23 million people, which is critical to world chip supplies. It's a major technology powerhouse, but the majority of that is on the west of the island.
Now, as of now, TSMC, which is the world's largest contract chip maker and supplier to Apple and NVIDIA, says that the production interruptions were brief and back to full speed very quickly. More pressure being applied to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as Benny Gantz, member of Israel's war cabinet, now calling for an election in September rather than in 2026. Meanwhile, Chef Jose Andres, the head of the World Food Kitchen, says Israeli soldiers systematically killed his workers one by one. White House spokeswoman Karine Jean-Pierre says all the more reason for a thorough investigation.
We leave it to, obviously, the Israeli government to do that investigation, but we want to make sure that it's swift, it's comprehensive, that it's made public, and it is important. We need to certainly get to the bottom of exactly what happened.
And the U.S. has confirmed that President Joe Biden will speak again with Netanyahu